The room smelled faintly of old wood and dust, the kind of smell that comes from years of quiet use. Sunlight slipped through the tall window and rested gently on the piano, lighting up the worn keys. Some of them were slightly yellow now, pressed by thousands of hands over many years. The teacher sat on the bench for a moment longer than usual, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the silence. This was one of the last weeks she would sit here. She had taught in this small music room for most of her life. Long enough to see fashions change, long enough to see children grow into adults and then return years later with children of their own. Once, the room had been loud with laughter and mistakes and excitement. Now it felt calmer, quieter, like it was slowly exhaling after a long breath. Retirement was close. Everyone kept telling her she deserved it. They said she had given enough, that it was time to rest. She smiled when they said those things because smiling was easier than explaining how strange it felt. Teaching the piano was never just a job to her. It was how she measured time, how she understood people, how she stayed connected to the world. Letting go of it felt like letting go of a part of herself. Her schedule had grown lighter over the years. Some students moved away. Some lost interest. Some parents decided music was no longer important enough to keep paying for lessons. She never blamed them. Life was busy. Still, each empty time slot felt like a quiet goodbye she never got to prepare for. That afternoon, a few students were still coming in one by one. Most of them chatted easily, talking about school, friends, or plans for the weekend. They played their pieces, made small mistakes, laughed, and promised to practice more. She encouraged them gently, the same way she always had. Her voice was softer now, but steady. Near the end of the day, the quietest student arrived. The student always came early and waited silently outside the door. Never knocked. Never complained. When invited in, the student walked carefully, like someone stepping into a place that mattered deeply. This student rarely spoke unless spoken to. Even then, answers were short and polite. No one knew much about the student's life, and no one had ever asked too many questions. At first, years ago, the teacher had worried. She wondered if the student was uncomfortable or unhappy. She tried gentle questions, simple jokes, small encouragements. The student responded with a nod, a soft yes, or a quiet smile that appeared and disappeared quickly. Over time, the teacher learned not to push. Some people needed silence the way others needed noise. The students sat at the piano and placed their hands on the keys. The music that followed was careful, slow, and thoughtful. Not flashy, not loud, but honest. Every note seemed chosen with care, as if the student was afraid of wasting even one sound. The teacher listened closely, as she always did. She noticed small improvements others might miss. A smoother transition, a stronger left hand, better timing. She pointed these out gently, never raising her voice. The student listened closely, eyes focused on the keys, absorbing every word. This student reminded her of why she had started teaching in the first place. Not to create performers, but to help people understand themselves through music. Some students wanted praise. Some wanted applause. This one wanted peace. When the lesson ended, the student stood up quickly, as if worried about taking too much time. The teacher reminded the student about practice, about posture, about breathing. The student nodded, said a quiet thank you, and left. The door closed softly behind them. The teacher stayed seated, staring at the piano. She wondered how many more times she would sit here like this. How many more students would walk through that door. Retirement papers were already signed. A replacement had been discussed. Everything was moving forward, whether she felt ready or not. She thought about all the students she had taught over the years. Some had become musicians. Most had not. Many probably forgot her name. And that was fine. Teaching was never about being remembered. Or at least that was what she told herself. Still, as she packed her bag that day, a small heaviness settled in her chest. Not sadness exactly. Something quieter. Like standing at a train station long after the last train had left. On her way out, she turned back and looked at the piano one more time. The keys caught the light again, just like they always had. She reached out and pressed one key gently. The sound echoed through the empty room, warm and familiar. She locked the door behind her. Outside, the hallway was quiet. Footsteps echoed far away. She walked slowly, taking in the details she had ignored for years. The faded posters on the walls, the old notice board, the bench where nervous students used to wait. She did not know that this quiet student, the one who barely spoke, was watching the days carefully, counting them, remembering every lesson, every correction, every moment of patience that had been offered without judgment. She did not know that for this student, the piano room was not just a classroom. It was a place of safety, a place where the world made sense, a place where someone listened without asking too much. As she stepped outside into the evening air, she believed her story here was slowly ending. She did not yet know that something small, something silent, was still waiting to be placed on those keys. The quiet student walked home slowly after the lesson, feeling the cool air brush against their face. The streets were calm, the sun beginning to dip behind the buildings, casting long shadows on the pavement. Music still lingered in the student's mind, the notes of the piano echoing softly, as if the day's lesson had left a small spark that refused to fade. Home was not a loud or warm place. It was functional, necessary, but not a space that made the student feel noticed or understood. The piano lessons were different. In the small room with tall windows and the gentle presence of the teacher, the student felt alive in a quiet, steady way. Every sound on the keys carried weight and meaning. It was a language the student understood without needing words. In the kitchen, a few dishes waited to be washed. The student avoided them, pretending not to notice the mess. Music had been the priority for as long as memory could reach. Lessons were not just time to play. They were time to breathe, to think, and to feel. The quiet student often replayed the day's instructions, every correction, every hint, and imagined doing it better, smoother, and with more confidence. At night, when the house was quiet and shadows stretched across the walls, the student practiced alone. Without the teacher watching, mistakes were more frequent, but so was learning. Each note, each chord was a small challenge, and every small success felt enormous. The piano became a companion, a friend who accepted silence and effort equally. The student thought about the teacher. Sometimes the teacher would speak only a few words, but those words mattered more than many long conversations. They guided, shaped, and encouraged without pressure. The teacher did not demand perfection, but asked for effort and honesty. That honesty became a mirror for the student, reflecting effort, patience, and growth. Outside, the seasons changed, though inside the student's mind, time moved differently. Lessons were measured in notes, in rhythms, in moments of understanding. The teacher's patience created space for reflection. The student remembered small things the teacher said, details others might forget. A gentle reminder to sit up straight, the tip about breathing between phrases, or the quiet encouragement when a mistake was made. Music became a way to understand life itself. The quiet student thought about challenges, friendships, fears, and hopes, translating them into sounds on the piano. Each key offered a choice, a chance to turn feelings into rhythm. The teacher's influence reached far beyond the classroom. Though the student rarely spoke, every gesture, every lesson, left a lasting mark. One rainy afternoon, the student arrived at the music room, soaked slightly by the sudden downpour. The teacher noticed immediately, offering a small smile and a towel without words. That simple act stayed with the student all day. It was not about the towel or the kindness, but the attention, the presence. It was a reminder that someone noticed, even when the world seemed indifferent. Over time, the student began to understand more than just music. The teacher's lessons were also lessons in patience, resilience, and quiet confidence. Life outside the music room was often loud, confusing, or discouraging, but here mistakes were acceptable. Growth was encouraged. Silence was respected. Effort was celebrated quietly. At school, classmates never noticed the student's dedication. They laughed, talked, and sometimes teased, never understanding the hours spent at the piano, the careful practice of scales, the quiet rehearsal of songs. The student preferred it that way. Music did not need an audience. It was an intimate conversation, and the teacher was the only person who fully participated. The quiet student often carried sheet music home, tucked under the arm, and imagined new melodies, variations, and harmonies. Each idea was tested on the piano, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing. Failure was not frightening. It was part of the journey. The teacher had taught this without saying it aloud. The lessons were as much about life as they were about music. When the end of the week approached, the students sometimes thought about the teacher's retirement. The idea was strange and unsettling. The teacher had always been there, a constant figure, a steady guide. The thought of lessons ending created a quiet ache. The student did not know how to express it in words, so it lived in notes, in pauses, and in lingering attention to every key press. Even in the evenings, after practice was over, the piano seemed to hum softly in the mind. The student would replay the teacher's instructions, imagining different ways to interpret them. Every subtle suggestion made a difference. Sometimes the student wrote little notes to self, reminders of advice, almost like letters to the teacher that would never be sent. The student's life outside music was filled with ordinary struggles. Homework, chores, and small social tensions existed alongside the dedication to the piano. Music became a way to manage all of it, a private space where the world made sense. Each lesson, each hour at the keys, strengthened the student quietly, building confidence that was not visible but deeply felt. Then came the day when the student realized just how important the teacher had been. Sitting alone at the piano, the student tried a difficult piece, making mistakes and correcting them, remembering every detail the teacher had mentioned. There was a moment of clarity, a spark of understanding. Music was not just sound. It was patience, presence, and the careful shaping of life itself. The quiet student knew that when the teacher retired, the room would feel empty, the world slightly less certain. But there was also a plan forming, a way to honor the lessons received, a desire to express gratitude. The student thought about ways to show appreciation, not with words, but with a gesture that could convey years of silent respect, dedication, and connection. Even in small, unnoticed ways, the teacher had left an impact. Each correction, each encouragement, each smile was stored in memory, quietly growing into something profound. The student understood that gratitude could take many forms, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet. This time it would be quiet, carefully considered, and deeply personal. The weeks went by. Rainy days, sunny days, evenings with shadows stretching across the walls, and mornings with soft sunlight. Every visit to the piano was an exploration, a step in a journey that had no finish line. The teacher was still there, the lessons still happening, but both knew the end was near. The students' respect and admiration had grown in silence, ready to manifest in a way that words could never fully capture. Finally, the day approached when the student knew the teacher would leave the room for the last time. Thoughts of what to do, how to show appreciation, and how to preserve the memory of these years filled the quiet mind. The student realized that some gestures needed preparation, thought, and courage. The music room had been a place of refuge, growth, and understanding. It deserved a farewell worthy of its quiet power. As the student walked home that evening, the piano's notes seemed to echo in every step. There was anticipation, nervousness, and excitement. The idea of a gift began to take shape in the mind, something simple yet full of meaning. A way to speak without words. A way to show the teacher that every moment, every lesson, every note had been understood, remembered, and treasured. The student knew that the teacher had no idea how deeply they had been seen. The quiet student had always watched, listened, and learned, not just about music, but about patience, kindness, and the value of silence. The thought of leaving a gift on the piano felt right. It felt like the only way to communicate the depth of feeling that could not be said in words. That night, the student lay awake, thinking carefully about what the gift should be. It had to be personal, meaningful, and sincere, something that would quietly speak of years of observation, growth, and understanding. The student imagined the teacher returning to the room, discovering the gesture, and feeling the connection that had always existed in silence. Music and lessons had shaped the student's life. The teacher had shaped it without knowing, and now the student was ready to shape one small moment in return. It would be the final note in a long conversation that had been unspoken but deeply understood. The quiet student smiled softly, knowing that one day soon, the piano room would witness a moment that spoke louder than any words ever could. The day of the last lesson arrived quietly, without fanfare or special announcements. The teacher arrived early, as usual, opening the door to the familiar smell of the music room, polished wood and the faint scent of past lessons. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, touching the piano keys with a warm glow, and she paused for a moment, letting herself take it all in. She knew this would be her final lesson here, a thought both comforting and strange. Students began to arrive, some chatting easily, others more focused on the piano. The teacher greeted each one with a warm smile, guiding them through their final lesson. Praise came easily, gentle corrections flowed naturally, but the weight of the day hung silently in the air. Every note, every chord, felt more meaningful than usual. The quiet student arrived later than the others, stepping softly into the room, slightly nervous. There was a small tremor in the hands, the result of anticipation and emotion. The teacher noticed immediately, offering a kind smile and a nod. No words were necessary. The understanding passed silently between them. The student moved toward the piano and took a seat, the familiar keys awaiting fingers that had known them for years. The student began to play. The piece was one they had been working on for months, each note chosen with care, each pause deliberate. The music filled the room with a calm, gentle energy, echoing softly against the walls. The teacher listened quietly, her heart swelling with pride and a hint of sadness. She knew this would be the last time she would hear the student play in her classroom. Time seemed to stretch as the student played. The teacher noticed the subtle improvements that had emerged over the years, the small details that made the music more expressive. The rhythm was steady, the dynamics thoughtful, and the phrasing careful. The student was focused, yet there was an unspoken conversation happening in every note, a dialogue that had grown over countless lessons. When the piece ended, the room was still for a moment, the sound lingering in the air like a delicate echo. The student looked up briefly, eyes meeting the teacher's, and offered a small, shy smile. The teacher returned it, trying to hide the emotion that threatened to show itself. Words were not needed. The music had said everything. The other students finished their lessons and left, some with quick goodbyes, others with hugs and thank yous. The room slowly emptied, leaving only the quiet student and the teacher. There was a sense of finality, of endings, yet also of continuity. The piano had witnessed countless moments, and now it would witness one last one, quiet but profound. The student stood and lingered near the piano, hesitant to leave. The teacher walked around, adjusting the music stand, offering gentle reminders about posture and practice. The student listened attentively, taking in every word, not just for the sake of music, but for the deeper understanding it represented. Each lesson had been more than notes. It had been patience, guidance, and care. As the teacher stepped away to retrieve a small sheet of music from her bag, the student's eyes wandered across the room. Memories surfaced. Every small correction, every encouragement, every quiet moment of understanding. The years had passed quickly, but the impressions remained vivid. This room had been a sanctuary, a place of learning and reflection. It had shaped the student in ways that were difficult to express. The teacher returned, placing the sheet music gently on the piano. The student reached for it but then paused. Something caught the eye. A small, folded piece of paper resting on the keys, delicately placed. At first, the teacher did not notice it, focused on the music in her hands. Then, slowly, she realized it was there. Curiosity mixed with surprise. The teacher approached the piano and picked up the paper. It was neatly folded, edges crisp, with a few words written carefully inside. She did not read it immediately, instead glancing at the student, who stood quietly, hands folded, eyes downcast. There was a hesitation in the room, a delicate tension that made the silence heavier. Finally, the teacher opened the paper. Inside was a message, simple yet deeply meaningful. The words spoke of gratitude, of respect, of how much the lessons had mattered. It was not just about music, but about life. The quiet student had managed to convey in a few sentences what years of words, gestures, and silent presence had hinted at. The teacher's hands trembled slightly as she held it, overwhelmed by the realization that her work had touched someone so profoundly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath, the piano waiting quietly, the sunlight resting on the keys as if acknowledging the moment. The teacher looked at the student and smiled, tears threatening to fall, but restrained by the desire to honor the quiet dignity of the gesture. The student remained still, waiting for a reaction, not seeking praise or attention, only hoping that the message had been received. The teacher's heart filled with a warmth that could not be measured. This small gift, placed silently on the piano, represented years of effort, patience, and connection that had gone unnoticed by the wider world, but was deeply understood by both. The teacher folded the paper gently, placing it in her bag to keep safe. She thanked the student, her voice soft but full of meaning. The student nodded, relieved that the gesture had been received, and turned to leave. The teacher watched, knowing that this moment would stay with her forever, a quiet testament to the impact of teaching and the depth of human connection. After the student left, the teacher sat at the piano, fingers brushing the keys lightly. She played a few notes, allowing the music to fill the empty room. Each sound carried memory, gratitude, and a sense of closure. The years of teaching, the countless students, the quiet dedication. They all converged in this final moment, simple yet profound. The room was still again, empty except for the piano and its echoes. The teacher rose slowly, walking to the window and looking out at the quiet street. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that her work had mattered, that her patience and care had left a lasting impression. In the days that followed, the teacher would pack up her classroom, prepare for retirement, and step into a life without lessons. Yet the memory of the quiet student and the gift on the piano would remain, a reminder that even the smallest gestures can carry enormous meaning. The piano room had been more than a classroom. It had been a place of connection, understanding, and growth. The quiet student had left something behind that could never be measured in notes or performances. It was a message of appreciation, a recognition of years of guidance and care. It was a final lesson, not about music, but about the human heart, about how kindness, patience, and attention can shape a life quietly but profoundly. And in that moment, the teacher knew that every late evening, every correction, every quiet word of encouragement had mattered. The years of dedication were not in vain. Through this simple, quiet act, the student had shown that teaching is never forgotten when it is done with sincerity, patience, and care. The piano room, once again, became a space of reflection, gratitude, and the quiet power of human connection. The teacher sat quietly in her favorite chair, the folded note from the quiet student resting in her lap. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper, feeling the subtle indentations of the handwriting. Each letter carried meaning, every word a small testament to years of unseen effort, patient instruction, and silent observation. She read it again, slowly this time, letting the words sink in. The message was simple, yet it carried the weight of a lifetime. It spoke of gratitude for patience, guidance, and the safe space the teacher had provided. It mentioned how the lessons had helped the student through hard times, how music had become a companion, and how the teacher's quiet encouragement had built confidence in ways words could never fully capture. The teacher felt her chest tighten with emotion. She had spent decades guiding young minds, never fully realizing the depth of impact she had. She looked around the empty music room, sunlight spilling across the piano keys. Each key seemed to glow a little brighter than before. Memories of lessons past came flooding back. Laughter, mistakes, corrections, applause, and the quiet moments that had often gone unnoticed. The room felt alive with echoes of the past, carrying the energy of every student who had passed through over the years. The teacher's mind went back to the quiet student's first lesson. So shy, so hesitant, barely speaking, yet curious and determined. Over the years, that curiosity had grown, nurtured gently by careful guidance. The student had never sought attention, never tried to impress anyone. Yet, with every lesson, with every correction and encouragement, the student had blossomed quietly, like a flower in shadow, waiting for the right moment to reveal its beauty. She realized that teaching was not about applause or recognition. It was about moments like this, small and personal, when the impact of guidance became visible. The gift on the keys was not just a note. It was a culmination of years of care, patience, and quiet influence. The teacher felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that her work had touched a life so deeply. The quiet student had chosen a gesture that needed no performance, no words shouted from a stage. It was private, meaningful, and deeply personal. It represented the bond between teacher and student, built over years of shared focus, effort, and silent understanding. The teacher knew that no award or recognition could ever match this. It was real, honest, and enduring. She thought about the countless students she had taught, many of whom had moved on and forgotten her lessons. But here was one who had remembered everything, who had carried the lessons forward, and who had found a way to say thank you without fanfare. It was a reminder that the value of teaching often exists beyond what can be seen or measured. It exists in quiet gratitude, in the shaping of lives, in the small choices people make long after the lessons are over. The teacher took a deep breath and reached out to the piano. Fingers pressed lightly against the keys, producing a soft melody that filled the empty room. Each note seemed to carry a story, a memory, a feeling. She played slowly, thoughtfully, letting the music reflect the weight and beauty of the moment. The melody was imperfect, touched by age and time, yet every note carried meaning. As she played, she imagined the students sitting at the keys, practicing silently, working through mistakes, learning not just music but patience, focus, and resilience. She thought of the hours spent together, the quiet encouragement, the small corrections, the unspoken understanding. It all culminated in the gift left on the keys, a symbol of a bond that could not be broken. The teacher knew that this moment would remain with her forever. It was a lesson in itself, showing her the true power of her work. Teaching was not just about music. It was about listening, observing, guiding, and believing in someone even when they did not yet believe in themselves. The quiet student had grown under that belief, and the gift on the piano was the proof. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the room wash over her. Outside, the world continued, but inside the music room, time felt suspended. Every memory, every lesson, every effort felt concentrated in that space. The room held decades of experience, dedication, and care, and the gift left by the student was a symbol that it had all mattered. The teacher reflected on her own journey. She had started teaching with hopes of helping children learn, never imagining the depth of influence she would have. She had seen success and failure, laughter and tears, and through it all, she had maintained patience and care. Now, in the quiet of the empty room, she understood the true meaning of her work. It was not in accolades or recognition, but in lives quietly transformed, in confidence quietly built, in gratitude quietly expressed. She reached out to the note again, reading it one more time. Each sentence seemed to speak directly to her heart. The quiet student had captured the essence of what it meant to learn and grow. The gift was not just for her. It was a reminder that teaching, patience, and care are never wasted, even when the results are unseen. The student's gesture was proof that the smallest acts of guidance could resonate for years. For a long time, the teacher sat in the room, letting the moment settle. She thought about the future, about retirement, and about how she would carry this memory with her. She knew she would leave the piano behind, but the impact of her work, the lessons she had taught, and the connection she had formed with the quiet student would remain. The student's gift had given her a sense of closure, a way to leave the room with a feeling of completion. It was more than a farewell. It was a celebration of years of dedication, effort, and growth. It reminded her that every moment spent teaching, every patient correction, every quiet word of encouragement, had meaning far beyond the classroom. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the late afternoon sky. The sun was beginning to set, painting the world in soft shades of orange and gold. The teacher felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that only came from knowing that her work had mattered in the deepest way. The gift left on the keys was a testament to a bond that could not be measured, only felt. The teacher picked up the piano bench and moved it closer to the keys, sitting down once more. She placed her hands lightly on the keys, letting her fingers linger on the familiar patterns. She played a melody that had been taught long ago, one she knew by heart, letting it fill the room. Each note echoed with memory, gratitude, and the quiet power of connection. She thought of the quiet student, of the hours of practice, of the patience and effort that had gone into every lesson. She thought of how the student had grown, not just in skill but in confidence and understanding. And she realized that this gift, simple yet profound, was more than a thank you. It was proof that teaching could shape lives, create bonds, and leave a legacy that could not be erased. The teacher closed the piano lid gently, letting the room fall into silence. The gift from the student rested in her hands, a physical reminder of something far greater than herself. She felt gratitude, joy, and a deep sense of fulfillment. The years of dedication, the long hours of patience, and the quiet influence had come together in this moment, and it was more than she could have ever expected. She stood slowly, placing the note carefully in her bag. She walked to the door, looking around the room one last time. The sunlight danced on the keys, the echoes of lessons passed lingering softly. She felt a sense of completion, a quiet happiness that could not be described but only felt. As she left the room, she carried with her the memory of the quiet student's gift, the knowledge that her work had mattered, and the understanding that teaching, in its truest form, is about touching lives in ways that are often unseen but always enduring. The room was empty, but it was full of meaning, and the teacher walked away with a heart filled with the quiet power of human connection. The teacher arrived at the music room one last time, knowing that this day would mark the official end of her teaching career. The sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the familiar keys that had guided countless students through lessons, challenges, and successes. The room was quiet, almost reverent, as if it knew the significance of the day. She walked slowly, her fingers brushing against the edges of the piano, lingering on the worn keys that held so many memories. Her mind wandered back over the years. The laughter of students, the clumsy mistakes that became graceful performances, the quiet moments when she offered a word of encouragement. Each memory came alive, vivid and warm. She realized that this room, filled with simple notes and ordinary sounds, had become a repository of growth, patience, and care. Every student had left a trace, but none more profound than the quiet student who had given her a gift on the keys. The quiet student arrived soon after, entering the room with careful steps, eyes scanning the space, and hands tucked together. There was a subtle nervousness, a mixture of anticipation and shyness. The teacher smiled softly, inviting the student to sit at the piano. No words were necessary. The understanding between them had grown through years of lessons, correction, and silent communication. The student's fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant at first, then flowing into a melody that spoke without words. The piece was one they had perfected over many months, a composition that contained more than just music. Each note was a reflection of effort, patience, and growth. The teacher listened closely, her heart swelling with pride and a quiet sense of fulfillment. The music seemed to reach beyond the notes themselves, carrying a message of gratitude and connection. As the final notes faded, the teacher reached out and touched the keys, feeling the vibration of each sound linger. She looked at the student, whose eyes were downcast, hands folded neatly. It was clear that the student had something important to convey, something beyond the music. The teacher nodded gently, encouraging the student without speaking. It was a moment suspended in time, a silent dialogue filled with understanding and anticipation. The student reached slowly for a small, carefully folded package resting on the piano keys. The teacher's eyes widened slightly in recognition. She realized immediately that this was more than a simple gift. It was a culmination of years of learning, observation, and quiet thought. The gesture was profound in its simplicity, reflecting the deep connection that had developed between teacher and student over the years. The teacher opened the package carefully. Inside was a small, handcrafted token, a music box shaped like a piano, delicate and detailed. As she lifted the lid, a gentle melody played, one that the student had often practiced during lessons. The teacher's hands trembled slightly, touched by the thoughtfulness and meaning behind the gift. It was more than a keepsake. It was a representation of time, effort, and the bond forged through music. The student looked up briefly, eyes bright with emotion yet still shy, and whispered a quiet thank you. The teacher responded with a soft smile, her voice catching slightly as she said, "This is beautiful. Thank you." There was a pause, a quiet moment in which the room seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the significance of the gesture. For a while, neither spoke. The teacher set the music box gently on the piano and let her hands rest on the keys. She played a few notes, a soft melody that seemed to honor the student's effort and gratitude. The room filled with sound, gentle and warm, each note echoing with memory and connection. It was as if the music itself was a conversation, a dialogue that transcended words. The quiet student sat back, watching the teacher with a mixture of awe and relief. The years of practice, the hours spent perfecting techniques, and the careful listening to every instruction had led to this single moment. The student had communicated what words could not, expressing gratitude, respect, and admiration through action, thoughtfulness, and attention to detail. The teacher paused, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about all the lessons, all the small corrections, all the encouragements given quietly over the years. The quiet student had absorbed it all, internalizing the guidance and transforming it into something meaningful. It was a demonstration of the power of teaching, patience, and care, and of the human ability to connect deeply without needing many words. They sat in the music room together for a while, the teacher playing softly, the student listening quietly. The light from the windows cast long shadows, warm and golden, illuminating the piano keys and the music box. The room felt alive with memories, with gratitude, with a sense of completion. Each sound, each gesture, was a testament to the relationship they had built together. Finally, the teacher spoke, her voice gentle but filled with emotion. "This gift means more than I can say. You've shown me the true meaning of all these years. Thank you." The student nodded, a small smile crossing their face, relieved that the message had been received. Words were few, but the meaning was clear. Their connection had been forged through music, time, and patience, and now it had been honored in the quietest and most sincere way. The student rose slowly and gathered their belongings. Before leaving, they placed a hand briefly on the piano, a silent gesture of respect and gratitude. The teacher watched, her heart full, knowing that this simple action carried more weight than any applause or praise ever could. It was the culmination of years of quiet dedication, learning, and mutual respect. As the student left the room, the teacher sat alone for a moment, letting the experience sink in. She opened the music box again, letting the melody play softly, and smiled. This final lesson, this single gesture, was more than a farewell. It was a celebration of the power of teaching, the depth of human connection, and the lasting impact of patience and care. The teacher rose, moving around the room one last time. Each key, each chair, each music stand held a memory. She felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that her work had mattered, that it had shaped a life quietly but meaningfully. The music room was now silent, yet full of echoes that would linger forever in her heart. Leaving the room, the teacher stepped into the evening air. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink, the sun setting on a day that marked the end of a long chapter. She felt peace, knowing that the gift from the quiet student had encapsulated years of effort, guidance, and connection. It was a reminder that teaching is never truly over, and that the impact of sincere care and patience can last far beyond the classroom. The teacher knew she would carry this memory for the rest of her life. Every note played, every lesson given, every small act of encouragement had been worth it. The quiet student's gift was proof that even the simplest gestures, when given with thought and sincerity, can have the deepest meaning. It was a final, beautiful confirmation of the bond they had shared. Walking away from the music room, the teacher felt a quiet joy. Her career had come to an end, but the impact of her work and the memory of the student's thoughtful gift would remain. It was a testament to the power of patience, care, and the quiet influence one life can have on another. The teacher smiled, knowing that in the hands of the student, the lessons had found their fullest expression, and her legacy would continue, quietly, through the music and the human connections she had nurtured.